The final out had just been recorded. The Dodgers had survived a wild 6-5 battle against the Kansas City Royals, and inside Dodger Stadium the celebration was still echoing through the building. But for Max Muncy, the night had already been unforgettable. He had delivered one of the biggest moments of the game, a go-ahead 3-run double in the 6th inning. It was also his special bobblehead day. Thousands of fans had celebrated him. His name had been announced throughout the stadium. His teammates had congratulated him. And somewhere inside the ballpark, his two children, Sophia and Wyatt, were waiting for their father. Muncy probably expected what usually happened after a game. His children would see him walking toward the clubhouse. They would run toward him. They would hug him. And the night would end with his family. But Shohei Ohtani had a completely different idea. And Muncy had absolutely no idea what was coming. As Muncy slowly walked away from the field, Ohtani wasn't heading straight toward the clubhouse. Instead, he changed direction. He made his way toward the area where Muncy's children were waiting. And when Ohtani arrived, something unusual happened. He crouched down. He looked directly at Sophia and Wyatt. And instead of simply greeting them, Ohtani gave them a mission. Their father was having his big day. So why not make him feel like a celebrity? Not as their dad. Not as their teammate. But as a baseball star. Ohtani quietly explained what they were going to do. Wyatt would hold a pen. Sophia would hold the Muncy bobblehead. And Ohtani himself would stand behind them. But there was one important rule. When Muncy arrived, they couldn't act like his children. They had to act like fans. And Ohtani was going to play the role of the biggest Muncy fan of them all. A few minutes later, everything was ready. Sophia stood near the hallway entrance holding the bobblehead. Wyatt held the pen. And behind them stood Shohei Ohtani, the global superstar. The player who normally has cameras following him everywhere. The man who can turn an ordinary Dodgers game into a worldwide story simply by stepping onto the field. But now, he was holding a cardboard sign. The sign said, "Big Muncy fan." Ohtani stood completely straight. His expression was serious. Almost too serious. He looked like a nervous fan who had been waiting all day for an autograph. Then Muncy appeared. He was walking toward the clubhouse, probably thinking about the game, his 3-run double, and finally seeing his kids. Then he looked up. And stopped. Standing in front of him were his own children. But something was wrong. They weren't running toward him. They weren't shouting "Dad." They weren't jumping into his arms. Instead, they were standing completely still. One was holding a pen. The other was holding his bobblehead. And behind them stood Shohei Ohtani. Muncy stared. For several seconds, he couldn't figure out what was happening. Then Sophia pointed toward the bobblehead. And with a completely serious expression, she said, "Please, Mr. Muncy, we're huge fans." Muncy immediately burst out laughing. He knew something was happening. But Ohtani wasn't laughing. Not yet. The Japanese superstar remained completely committed to the performance. He stood behind the children holding his cardboard sign. Muncy looked at Ohtani. Then looked at his children. Then looked at the pen. He shook his head. He couldn't believe this. But he played along. Muncy took the pen from Wyatt. He carefully signed the bobblehead. And the entire time, Ohtani stood behind the children as if he were genuinely waiting for his turn. That was the part that made the prank so funny. Ohtani wasn't just participating. He was completely committed. He didn't smile. He didn't break character. He didn't give Muncy any indication that the joke was about to get even bigger. Muncy eventually finished signing. He handed the pen back to Wyatt. Then he turned around. He thought it was over. He thought he could finally walk into the clubhouse. But Ohtani had one more move. Suddenly Ohtani stepped forward. He raised the cardboard sign directly in front of Muncy. Then he held out the pen again. Muncy stopped. He looked at Ohtani. And finally understood. This wasn't just something his children had planned. Ohtani was the mastermind. The superstar had turned Muncy's own children into accomplices. And now Muncy had to sign again. He laughed while shaking his head. The message was obvious. Only Shohei Ohtani could turn a normal post-game celebration into something this ridiculous. Muncy signed the cardboard sign. And finally, the children couldn't hold it in anymore. Sophia and Wyatt burst into laughter. Ohtani finally dropped his serious expression. Muncy laughed. The children laughed. And for a few seconds, the entire world of baseball disappeared. There was no pressure. No statistics. No postseason discussion. No cameras demanding answers. Just four people laughing in a hallway after a Dodgers victory. And that was exactly what made Ohtani's prank so special. Because Ohtani could have easily made himself the center of attention. He is one of the biggest stars in baseball. But instead, he used his own star power to make someone else feel special. And Muncy would soon explain why that tiny moment meant much more to him than anyone watching from the outside could have imagined. Max Muncy thought the joke was over. He had signed the bobblehead. He had laughed at the sight of his own children pretending to be random fans. And he had already figured out that Shohei Ohtani was somehow behind the entire thing. But Ohtani wasn't finished. As Muncy turned toward the clubhouse, Ohtani stepped directly into his path. Still holding the cardboard sign that read "Big Muncy Fan," Ohtani looked completely serious. Muncy stared at him. Then he started laughing again. Because Ohtani wasn't asking for a photo. He wasn't asking for another autograph. He was demanding one more signature. Muncy shook his head as if to say, "Seriously, Shohei." But Ohtani simply held out the pen. For one of baseball's biggest stars, it was an unexpectedly ridiculous performance. The man who normally had thousands of fans asking him for autographs was now standing in a hallway asking Max Muncy to sign something for him. And Muncy couldn't believe how committed Ohtani was to the joke. He signed the cardboard sign. Only then did Ohtani finally break character. His serious expression disappeared. He smiled. Sophia and Wyatt immediately started laughing. And Muncy laughed with them. For a few seconds, the three teammates and the two children completely forgot about the game. No cameras. No statistics. No pressure. Just a father, his children, and one teammate who had decided to turn an ordinary post-game moment into a memory. What made the prank special wasn't simply that it was funny. It was who Ohtani chose to make the joke about. Muncy had already enjoyed a huge moment on the field. His 3-run double had helped the Dodgers secure the 6-5 victory. The stadium had celebrated him. His bobblehead had made him the center of attention. But Ohtani understood that the biggest moment for Muncy might not have been the one thousands of people witnessed. It might have been the one only a handful of people saw. Ohtani could have simply congratulated Muncy after the game. Instead, he involved Muncy's children. He gave them roles. He made them part of the joke. And most importantly, he created a moment their father would remember long after the statistics from the game were forgot. That's what made Ohtani's prank different. It wasn't about embarrassing Muncy. It was about making him smile. Later, Muncy admitted that seeing his children pretending not to recognize him was one of the funniest things he had experienced after a game. Normally, Sophia and Wyatt would run toward their father. This time, they stood there like complete strangers. One wanted an autograph. The other held a bobblehead. And behind them stood Ohtani, acting like the world's most serious baseball fan. Muncy said the moment reminded him that his children don't always see him as the baseball player everyone else sees. To them, he's simply dad. But for a few minutes that night, Ohtani helped them see something different. He allowed them to experience their father as the star they saw thousands of other fans celebrating. And that made the moment surprisingly emotional. Because sometimes the most powerful recognition doesn't come from a stadium full of people. It comes from your own family. And Ohtani had found a hilarious way to give Muncy exactly that moment. The Dodgers had just won 6-5. Max Muncy had delivered the go-ahead 3-run double. Thousands of fans had celebrated him. But when the night was over, it wasn't the hit that Muncy kept talking about. It was the hallway. It was Sophia and Wyatt pretending to be strangers. And it was Shohei Ohtani standing behind them with a cardboard sign that said, "Big Muncy Fan." That's what made the moment so memorable. Muncy later explained that his children normally see him simply as their dad. They don't think about the statistics. They don't think about the stadium. They don't think about the pressure of playing Major League Baseball. But that night, Ohtani temporarily changed their perspective. For a few minutes, Muncy became the player they wanted an autograph from. And Ohtani made the entire thing happen. That's also what makes this story interesting from a clubhouse perspective. Leadership doesn't always mean giving a speech. Sometimes it means knowing when your teammate needs a laugh. Ohtani could have walked into the clubhouse after the victory and celebrated his own performance. Instead, he spent part of his post-game time thinking about Muncy and his family. He used his superstar status to make someone else the center of attention. And that's a powerful quality inside a championship clubhouse. Muncy had already been celebrated by thousands of fans. But Ohtani created something much more personal. Something that belonged only to Muncy and his family. The bobblehead ceremony was supposed to be the memorable part of Muncy's night. But years from now, Sophia and Wyatt might not remember exactly what happened during the game. They may not remember the score. They may not remember every hit. But they could remember standing in a hallway with Shohei Ohtani, pretending not to know their own father. They could remember asking him for an autograph. And they could remember watching Ohtani finally break character and laugh. That's the kind of memory that doesn't appear in a box score. And perhaps that's why Ohtani's prank was so meaningful. He didn't just celebrate a teammate's baseball achievement. He celebrated the person behind the uniform. The father. The teammate. The man whose biggest fans were standing right there waiting for him. In professional sports, superstar relationships are often measured through statistics. Home runs. RBIs. ERA. Championships. But inside a clubhouse, something else matters. Trust. Friendship. Humor. And the ability to make teammates feel like they belong. Ohtani showed all of that in a few minutes. He turned Muncy's children into pranksters. He turned Muncy into an autograph target. And he turned a normal post-game hallway into a memory the family could carry forever. The Dodgers won the game that night. But for Max Muncy, the biggest victory may have happened after the final out. Because Shohei Ohtani reminded him that sometimes the moments that matter most never appear on the scoreboard.